Welcome back to the special lecture, the second special lecture of the Centennial of KDJ, Kim Dae-jung's Birth Peace Festival. This session is even more special because we have some invited discussants joining us towards the end of the presentation. So the topic of our second presentation is the peaceful coexistence of human and nature, and the presentation will be delivered by Chairperson Kim Myung-ja from KAIST. So please welcome her to the stage with a big round of applause. Yes, hello, I am Kwon Ho-sung. I will be the moderator for this session. We are gathered here to celebrate the centennial of Kim Dae-jung's birth through this peace festival, and we have been the first session talked about peace. Now we're going to shift gear a little bit and talk about nature, life, and naturally climate change. And I believe we have invited a very apt person to be discussing this issue. She served as the environment minister, the longest standing environment minister during the Kim Dae-jung government administration. She herself is a chemist and currently serves as the chairperson of KAIST. So we have invited her to deliver a special lecture. Following the speech, we will have a special discussion on climate change. I myself have served as a journalist before coming into my current position, and I'm very much interested in how we are going to deal with climate change. So we have invited some activists and experts on how we're going to fight climate change together. So that will be our discussion session. And for the presentation, we have 90 minutes for the entire session, and we've used up about 5 minutes of it already. So I would suggest we give the chairperson 35-40 minutes for the presentation, 40 to 45 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll use the rest of the time for the discussion.
네,
Yes, good afternoon. I have provided the PPT in both Korean and English, and I would like to deliver my presentation in Korean. I'm reminded of the commencement speech by Mr. Steve Jobs back in 2009, where the famous speech where he talks about how he connected the dots. I have been talking about giving lectures on climate change, related to climate change, for about 40 years now. Now, if I go back 33 years back in that 40 years and 23 years back in that 40 years, I said something, I discussed something back then, and I think the dots from 32 years ago, from 23 years ago, and today's presentation is connected through a book. I joined the Ministry of Environment back in 1999 and left in 2003, so the millennia started while I was in office. Back then, President Kim Dae-jung had extensive discussions about climate change. And in October of 2000, we published a book that you're seeing on the screen right now. So we had the global responsibility and global peace. And it was a collection of Kim Dae-jung's philosophy, his knowledge and his beliefs related to climate change. So that book actually connects the dots for me in discussing this discussion. I would like to start off by asking you how was your summer this year? Now, I personally really felt scared. This year, I felt scared as to how the climate has changed so much. And I found myself dreading the summer of 2025 because I can only imagine it going to be even more hotter than ever before. Extreme weather patterns, we've had a list of those, and last year I think we topped every single list that we have accumulated so far. So everybody's been talking about the global tipping point. So I'm going to start off with that discussion. So again, the global tipping point. Things that are happening around us, it's just a nightmare. And it has a cascading effect. It has a domino effect. One is impacting the other in a more negative way, unfortunately. So this is what we see on the map. Different institutions have given slightly different numbers and figures and years, but basically they're all saying that we are approaching the global climate change tipping point. Just to name a few, this page shows you the type of different climate changes that the extreme weather patterns that we're facing: droughts, fires, meltdowns, dying of coral reefs. And we used to say that 2023 was the most turbulent year in terms of extreme weather patterns. And this year, in 2024, we unfortunately have hit the records for all of the things that had happened in 2023. So now we're faced with a polycrisis. And at the core of the global polycrisis, we have the climate change. So crisis in resources, economics, social, political, healthcare, environment crisis, all related to or was caused by the climate change. So you've had pouring rain, you've had heat waves, which impacted the growth of our everyday crops. That is going to impact our consumer prices, and that directly affects the public sentiment. Unease in the public sentiment leads to political instability, and escalated would lead to economic and social disruption. So you're seeing some of the cartoons from the US media. We currently have 8.2 billion people living on Earth. And although every single one of them are impacted by the climate change, we sense this frustration of not being able to do anything. So me as an individual, what can I do as a poor individual to change the environment? So that's what the cartoon reads. Going back to 2008, there was the global trend to 2008. Published by the State Information Commission of the United States. And so all of these trends interact with one another, escalating the global uncertainty. In 2021, the same institution published an upgraded version and stated that there are 4 structural forces that is going to determine our future. And those were aging, the environment, economics, and technology. And it stated that climate action is failing, Thus, the global community is going to fall into a very dire situation. So there are numerous reports coming out from different institutions, the World Economic Forum being yet another, which published a global crisis report 2024 listing top 10 risks that is going to impact the world as the world approaches the climate critical point. Another report coming from IPCC. IPCC, as you well know, is a group of more than 3,000 renowned global scientists, and they have been publishing reports, and we have the sixth publication right now. So the discussion right now is the climate change man-made or is it a natural disaster? So there's been a debate for over the decades whether climate change was man-made or a natural event. And right now, 95% of the scientists agree that climate change is a man-made disaster. Now, we heard the importance of containing the global temperature rise to 1.5%. So 1.5%, it's only 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? But really, think about what this 1.5 degrees Celsius means. If your child's body temperature goes from 36.5 to 38, 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, you have to take the child to the emergency room. So it may seem little, but it's a really critical number. And the Earth has experienced the most rapid change in terms of temperature throughout its thousands and thousands of years. Unfortunately, humans do not have the ability to adapt as quickly to such temperature change. So we are the weakest of all living things on nature. So again, climate change is man-made, and unfortunately, we cannot adapt to the rapid changes. So this page shows you the great acceleration. So from 1950 to 2024, how everything has changed so rapidly. Socioeconomic trends and the Earth system trends have all seen such a big change. And if you look at it closely, ever since the 1950s, everything is rising, from population, real GDP, and so forth. Do we see anywhere that this rising graph is going to at some point reach a plateau, a stalemate? Well, scientists have agreed that it's going to even further accelerate, and it is only going to mean an end to the human civilization as we know it. So that is the sad but scientific conclusion that we can reach. So we are running out of resources. We are, being drowned in the pollution that we're creating. And that can only lead to the alienation of humankind itself. Another graph shows you the temperature rise from the early 1900s all the way to present. And that the temperature rise shows an identical pattern to the increase of CO2 in the air. So we can clearly see that the temperature rise, global temperature rise, coincides with the CO2 emissions. Now, CO2 does not go anywhere. Once it's created, it stays where it is. So if we were to stop all industrial activities from tomorrow morning, that is not going to change the level of CO2 we already have on Earth. So even if we change the way we do business, even if we change the way we consume things, already we have more than the right level of CO2 in the air. So even if we shift to renewable energy, that is not going to change things that much because we've already messed up. To make matters worse, we see countries all across the globe continuing to emit more CO2 every year. Now, different countries have made different contributions. You can see here that China, countries in Asia, India, and the United States have emitted huge amounts of CO2. So this graph shows you their contribution to the disaster that we face now. And it was in 2005 that China surpassed the United States in terms of the annual CO2 emissions. So if you look at the accumulated level, so which started from 1750s to all the measurements all the way to 2019, the United States has contributed to 25%. China, 52% of the accumulated CO2 emissions to the world. And on this map, you see areas that have had more CO2 emissions in darker colors. Now, what is unfortunate is that the CO2 emitting countries are not the most impacted by the climate change induced by CO2 emissions. It is actually developing countries or underdeveloped countries who, in a way, have not contributed to CO2 emissions are being negatively affected by CO2 emissions, and they do not have the resources, they do not have the technology or nor know-how to fight back the negative effects of CO2 emissions. So there's a huge inequality in terms of countries being impacted by CO2 emissions. And this chart, it's a little complicated. I might have to spend 30 minutes just to explain this one chart alone. But basically, this chart talks about how the climate change has a mechanism of affecting specific social economic activities around the world. So here you have the CO2, the human activities, the climate change mechanism, and the threats that is being results because of that. So you have the strategic resources, energy, food, and water all being affected by this mechanism. This chart shows you how the natural disasters by different types are reported around the globe. The blue or green, blue indicates flood. Red indicates extreme weather events. So it's either very cold or very warm or huge fluctuations. Now, those kind of situations is devastating for humankind because we cannot adjust to such abrupt changes. Now, food security is one example of the negative disasters that is being affected by climate change. As humans, we need to eat. And how you feed your people, basically, is going to have direct impact on the political stability of that nation. And as you can see, food issue is really is negative. I wrote a book titled Coronavirus and the Human Civilization based on my study and effects of experiencing the pandemic. And if you look closely, all pandemics coincide with the climate change and the caused food crisis throughout the world's history. Now, the COVID crisis was actually a golden opportunity for us to come together as a global community to really work together in dealing with the climate change issues. Now, there were some cooperation, of course, at the UN level, at the World Health Organization level to, work with build the creation of the vaccines and so forth, but it wasn't enough. In the previous presentations, we heard about peace and how peace can be maintained. And this peace regime came into effect after World War II, right? The victor's story has been set. We talk about the Bretton Woods system and how the United States has led the global community to a much peaceful situation. Now that peace has lost its momentum, the international system that worked to maintain such peace is nowhere to be found. The supply chain has turned into something that each countries are, fighting over instead of cooperating for the effective distribution of the limited resources that we have. So as you can see, we are, compared to the prehistoric times and the modern times, we have much more resources, but we are also emitting or throwing away the resources at a gigantic scale. So what used to be the linear economy has been shifted to a circular economy. Yes, we try to solve the problem to a certain extent. And there are some issues that we saw some glimpse of hope. But unfortunately, we as humans have been creating more problems than presenting solutions. So that has resulted in the human civilization really being burdened with such a big task that is very difficult to solve. So yes, we have been working together to solve these problems, and yes, we have made some progress, but we have caused more problems than the solutions that we have presented. At the World Economic Forum, Chairman Klaus Schwab has mentioned that there are top climate tech trends that is going to impact our lives, which is listed on this slide. And yes, these technologies have made some contribution to solving the problems. But even here, we have the issue of intellectual property rights, where the advanced countries are having a very strong grip over these technologies, and the developing countries have no financial means, no technological means to have access to these technology trends. So there's been this back and forth about who needs to support or provide the technology for the countries that are in need. So at the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Convention, we discussed and agreed upon the NPI, the Nature Positive Initiative. So my message here is that, yes, we have been trying to solve the problem at hand. We talked about the sustainability of things to solve the climate crisis. And we talked a lot about ESG, carbon, net zero. So there are really fancy words that are already out there. stakeholder capitalism. So there are like a long list of the different terminology, keywords that we have thrown out, saying that these are our answers to solving the climate change. But were they really effective is yet another question. And the most recent discussion, we have been hearing yet another term which comes after the important issue of biodiversity. So we now talk about the nature positive economies. And we have launched the G7 Alliance of Nature Positive Economies in 2023. The book is also published in Korean, so please, you can use that as a reference. So this nature positive is the new term. So along with the biosphere, we are now talking about the technosphere, which is overwhelming the biosphere. So our next question is, how are we going to seek the harmonious coexistence of the biosphere and the technosphere? So the Max Planck Institute, for example, is working on solving this kind of question. So these are the things that have been happening in the world. Now, going back to President Kim Dae-jung, I told you about the book that that we published as a collection of the words, the philosophy, and policy suggestions by President Kim Dae-jung in October of 2000. And I had almost forgotten about the book, but I found this reference, and there's a quote which I wrote myself stating that in the new era of the 21st century, if we have been pursuing peace as a concept in the concept of war, we believe that the meaning of peace should be expanded to embody the true reconciliation between human and nature. So that was back in 2000, October of 2000. At the end of the book, which was a collection of President Kim Dae-jung's environmental vision for the new millennia. So in these speeches, we have statements where we need to think of Earth as our mother and all things on Earth, not just humans, but all things on Earth as our brothers and sisters, so that we can prosper and survive together. So these were the words of President Kim Dae-jung almost 20 years ago. And President Kim Dae-jung already mentioned the vision of the people's government to create a community where humans and nature coexist by firmly establishing an eco-friendly conditions in all fields. So you can see that he already had a very grand vision. We all know that Korea is a very small country. We are not a rich resource country. We have to import the resources, we manufacture things, and we export it. And that means all the pollution that comes from the manufacturing process stays within our land. And to top it off, we proceeded with a very rapid industrial development. So in that sense, Korea has already experienced the highest level of dense pollution. And yet we do things fast, we do things quickly, so we have accumulated the industrial pollution at a very rapid speed. And President Kim Dae-jung, having a vision, having a deep understanding of how Korea's economy developed, had presented the new millennium environmental vision to provide a momentum to change all of this kind of activity. So in the vision, He talks about how things should be decentralized, how human rights should be more emphasized as over the industrial development.
2002년 월드컵을 열기로 했습니다.
And
공기가 너무 나빴어요. 1988년에 막
in
연탄
1988, Korea's air was really, really poor. And that's the year when we hosted the Seoul Olympics. And we stopped burning those round coal blocks in order to clean up the air. And then came year 22 when we were to host the World Cups. And that is the year we introduced the CNG buses throughout the city of Seoul. We had to change about 70 different laws in order to allow for the CNG buses to run. It was a tremendous amount of work. One of the very proud achievements of my term as the Ministry of Environment in the People's Government. Another big achievement was clearing up the Nakdonggang brackish areas. Right now, looking back, the CNG, the introduction of the natural gas buses in the Seoul metropolitan area is something that really changed the quality of air in Seoul. So we've already talked about how President Kim Dae-jung's vision, first of all, brought about democracy in Korea. He also promoted economic growth. He emphasized the importance of ICT. And all of this really helped us to fight against COVID back in 2020 to 2023. So I'm a scientist by nature, and I also studied science administration. And it was during the President Kim Dae-jung's government, the People's Government, where we first introduced the basic science, the fundamental science basic plan. So that was the first initial adoption of a master plan at a state level to introduce science development, induce science development.
씻어가지고 병에 물러가지고 뭐 변기 수정해 놓고 이제 이러던 시절인데요. 아무튼 그렇게.
So it was a long time ago, and that was the start of how we did little things like filling up our water tanks in our, restrooms with like 1 liter, 2 liter water bottles to save water, which looking back does not really have an effect of saving water, but we started with what we could do. That expanded to saving water at major buildings throughout the city. So we've gone through stage by stage, step-by-step efforts to save water, to reduce waste, and to turn the landfills into park areas. So democracy, human rights, environmental and scientific development were always intertwined in President Kim's policies and his vision towards the future of Korea. He also signed a lot of environmental conventions. So you will remember that Korea started off as being the developing countries when all the environmental conventions were being discussed. However, President Kim's administration introduced a different approach to being rather submissive, labeling ourselves as a developing country. Kim Dae-jung government said we would share differentiated but common responsibility for the environment-related issues. So that was a big shift in the paradigm.
만든다고 뭐 앞에 이제 몇 번 강연을 하면서 내가 옛날에 그린 GDP 했던 생각이 나는 거예요. 그린 GDP 도입하겠다 그러고
And another rather radical concept that I introduced during the Kim Dae-jung administration was the green GDP. So this was in 2002, 2000. And we proposed, as part of the Eco2 project, where we focus both on ecology and economy. So this is a policy that was adopted by the people's government in the 2000. And I reported to the president that we will be preparing various policies to support the green GDP. So basically, the green GDP refers to how much natural resources we are going to be using to increase a certain amount of GDP. So if you increase the GDP but create pollution, create waste, then you have to take that number out. So in the past, we thought about just increasing the GDP numbers through economic development no matter what the cost is. But now, around year 2000, we introduced the green GDP, saying that the increase in GDP must take into account the use of resources and the creation of pollution as we calculate the GDP numbers. So the current discussions about the NPI, the nature positive NPE, the nature positive economy, I think can be seen as a continuation or the expanded version of the green GDP that we already discussed back in the year 2000s. Ultimately, we are facing an existential threat of climate change. So this is something that is going to affect all of us. This is not my own definition. It's already been discussed internationally. And this fundamental existential threat cannot be met by one nation alone. I already showed you that there is a huge inequality amongst global countries as to how they contribute to the climate change and how they're affected by the climate change as well. With the supply chain collapsing, things have escalated. The instability has escalated. So it seems that we are, in fact, turning the clock back to not historic advances, but degradation. At a time when we need the strongest collaboration, strongest dialogue, we are in fact going backwards. That is a deplorable situation, and that is another existential crisis that we face. Yet, we need to remember that we've had crises before, and we as humans, I believe, are capable of pulling together the wisdom and really overcoming the challenge that lie ahead of us. Back in 1991, scientists, I've written another book about the titled Environmental Movement in conjunction with the scientific traditions of the East and West. So that was the book I wrote in 1991. So this is what it looked like. And this was published 33 years ago. And already the book kind of had a conclusion or a solution to how we're going to solve this existential crisis. It states that social, economic, cultural changes alone is not going to be enough unless we bring about the changes in the people's mindset. So that was the conclusion that I drew back 33 years ago. And going through COVID, I was reminded of what I wrote back some 30 years ago. We are the virus on the earth. Earth is our host, and we are the virus that is living on it. If the earth dies, that means our host dies. And humans, being the virus, living on the host of the earth, will not survive. So this is a very simple logic. And that is why I still believe, that we need to change the mindset of the people. And unless we are able to do that, we are not going to be able to solve the problem at hand. So this is another dot that I bring out. Now the book is no longer published, but I found the book in a blog, which basically had a copy of the entire book from page 1 to the last cover. So I downloaded it and have it in a digital format now. So again, everything needs to be reinterpreted. The relationship between different religions, the relationship between humans and nature and technology needs to be reinterpreted, restudied. So that was the conclusion of the book, of my book. So I'm not going to go into the book itself, but basically it's saying that we have a common theme. Different religions, different technologies, different systems have a common theme. And I've listed 3 of them. So these are the common themes that we find in the traditional beliefs, humans, religions, and the technology that we have. We have a discussion awaiting us with some youth activists, and their activities are one of the 2 examples that I wanted to share with you. The UN announced the 1972 Stockholm UN Environmental Conference, where they talked about the sustainable relationship between social, environment, and economics. Now again, back in 1972, we already knew that we had a problem, but as I said at the very beginning, slogans and nice catchphrases are not going to solve the problem. We really have to put things into action. Case in point is the plastic convention that we are discussing right now. If this convention takes form, then it's going to be yet another big step forward.
그걸 조율을 해야 되는 그런 과정이
It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of challenges that lie ahead of us.
2024년 9월에 캘리포니아주가
But we are seeing some glimmer of hope. The state of California in the United States has filed charges against the ExxonMobil, the famous oil company, over plastic recycling deception.
안 돼요.
So again, recycling of plastic is a big hoax. All scientists already knew this.
이런 체계와
And we, the general public, have been hoaxed into believing that me recycling 10 plastic bottles a week is going to somehow change the world.
제품을 다시
That is not the case. It is simply not the case. It's the plastic manufacturers have made it so that such recycling isn't really going to be good for the nature.
근데 문제는 제일 중요한 핵심은 짧게 쓰고 버리는 거를 줄여야 한다 하는 겁니다. 근데 그게 잘 안 되고 있고 그게 자꾸 늘어나는 게 가장
So
문제인데
the
지금 여기에서
point here is that we need to stop using things
사실
for one-time use. We need to prolong the life of things that we're using. But the plastic manufacturers have
정책이 나왔어야지
hoaxed us into believing that if we recycle this, it's going to help us and help the nature. So the state of California is starting a case against this issue with the ExxonMobil as the plaintiff. So we'll see how this goes. So basically, you have to use far less plastic and use more glass, paper, and so forth. So that's one case of action being taken against this issue. Another case that I wanted to share with you is the youth climate action, which is something that happened in Korea. Now, this cover of Time shows Greta Thunberg, who used to be the symbol of youth action against climate change worldwide.
그동안의 소송, 이 오랜 시간을 끌면서 결정문이 나왔습니다.
The decision document on the climate constitutional complaint was delivered by the Constitutional Court of Korea in August 2024.
그런 의미에서 위헌이라고 했고 26년
So
2월까지
basically regarding the issue raised in this case about the absence of plans for the year 2030 to 2050, in Article 8, Paragraph 1 of the Framework Act on Convention Neutrality, the Korean Constitutional Court declared it unconstitutional. The court ordered that the article and paragraph of the convention, the carbon neutrality, must be amended by February 2026. So this alone was a huge achievement. But of course, this is no easy issue. It's a very complicated matter, and we really need to put our heads together to solve this and lead this into the next level of action.
말씀을 마치기로 하는데 김대중 대통령께서 이제 재임하시던 그때가 뉴 밀레니엄이었고.
So around the year 2000, when President Kim Dae-jung was in office, we all talked about the new millennium, and the environmental issue was not really at the top priority of the public policy agenda. Yet, as I said, he introduced various policies to deal with the environmental issues. Prior to President Kim's administration, things related to the environment were the aftermath, cleaning up of that we made, but he shifted it to a preventive measure. So I just wanted to emphasize that as I wrap up my presentation. So thank you very much, Chairperson Kim Myung-ja, for the wonderful presentation. We have invited 3 people to participate in the discussion. We have lawyer Yoon Se-jong and activist Kim Bo-rim and Yoon Hyun-jung. So please welcome them with a big hand.
이쪽부터 이렇게 차례대로 자기 소개를 좀 부탁드릴까요? 끝에부터 윤현정 활동가님부터.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 청소년 기후행동에서 활동하고 있는 윤현정이라고 합니다. 반갑습니다.
안녕하세요. 저 함께 활동하고 있는 활동가
I am Yoon Hyun-jung, activist from Youth for Climate Action, and I'm Yoon Bo-rim, an activist from Youth for Climate Action, and I am Yoon Se-jong, director or an attorney from Plan 1.5.
우선 그 세 분을 모셨으니까 그리고 또 발표에서 나왔던
We have 3 panelists,
한국 헌법재판소에서
and we had the great ruling from the Korea Constitutional Court.
대해서부터 이야기를 좀 나눠.
Regarding that, I want to open our discussion.
있을 것 같아요. 그래서
There are some people who may not know about the ruling. So, the Attorney Yoon, can you elaborate the ruling? This is climate litigation. So we resort to the legal action, the settlement for the climate. March 2020. A lot of plaintiffs gathered that the country's measure against climate warming were not sufficient enough to protect citizens' right for happy life. So we brought that issue to the Constitutional Court, and August this year, we got the ruling that the current climate system in Korea is not sufficient enough, so all the burdens will be passed down on the future generation. So the Korean government's stance on the climate change was not good enough. That was the constitutional ruling. That was the world fifth ruling and the first in Asia. So I believe the constitutional decision was very supportive for our actions against climate warming down the road. The great crisis looming large in front of us. And actually, we had the bill or the law for the climate change issue, but the Constitutional Court found that the law is not sufficient enough to protect the country from the climate crisis. And why did you come up with an idea to bring the case to the Constitutional Court in the first place?
사실 처음에 이제 소송을 제기할 때까지
At first, when we filed for the lawsuit,
단체라는 모여 있는 청소년들이었고
actually we are the member of the youth groups. So conventionally, we sent a letter to the National Assembly, or we made some campaign against a certain investment that would be harmful to the environment. That was our usual activities. However, those campaigns were discouraged due to the decision makers' decision. Always we got the words from the decision makers. Only we will this. The next time we will not that. But we cannot. So we cannot be guaranteed for our request. So we as a minors were excluded from the decision making process.
거기에 의사결정이 돌아간 테이블 속에 다
And yes, true that we were not sitting together with a negotiating table. So we got a conclusion that we may not able to stop the climate action by sitting idle. Rather than asking to do something specific to the decision makers, we decided to do whatever we can do. So that's the idea that we just put the obligation to the decision makers. So as a citizens, we thought that the court ruling would be necessary because the voluntary will is not enough to stop the crisis. So we got the right endowed efforts. And so based on that, we decided to bring the obligation to the decision makers through the Constitutional Court. You are the leaders of the future.
나이가 들어서 주인공이 될 텐데 기후 위기 문제는 아까
The climate crisis
미래를 현대 세대가 좀 뺏어온
is very serious because you were deprived of right to enjoy your life in the future. So your voices are very important.
그 발제를 해주신 이사장님께서는 혹시 이
We have
소송에 대해서
Chairperson Kim Myung-ja. Have you heard of this climate litigation?
네.
보시면서
Yes, I read it in the papers.
우리 젊은이들이
And my initial reaction was how smart our young people are, and our future is not all that doomed.
그럼 구체적으로 이 소송이라는 게 또 보통 일이 아닌데
Now this litigation is a very, arduous procedure for anyone. So I'd like to ask lawyer Yoon Se-jung to share with us some of the difficulties or challenges that he faced as he proceeded with the overall litigation. So we first came together in 2019 to discuss the matter, and we heard the opinions of the young people. So I mean, as a lawyer, it was a legally very challenging case, because a litigation is, there's a law, and if somebody breaks the law, then we ask for the punishment. That's how a normal litigation works. But in this case, we were saying that the law itself was flawed, and the case was related to something that would happen in the future. So it was challenging in all fronts. But we felt a need to go ahead with this litigation because all of the things that these young activists have raised were so true. Because everybody around the world was saying climate change is an issue, it's going to be a serious matter that's going to affect our lives. And yet, the law was not in place to obligate the lawmakers and the businesses to respond to it, to act properly. So this had to be brought to the attention of the courts. So we agreed or decided to go ahead with the case. We had different idea exchange sessions with similar groups worldwide and proceeded with our own litigation. So again, the case took about 4 years. It's a very long time. And throughout the years, I think there would have been various moments of ups and downs. So I'd like to ask activist Kim Borim to share with us if there's any episodes or events that you remember. Well, when we first set out to do this, we have already heard that climate change is a huge problem. We were born into it. We, were raised thinking that climate change equals the polar bears, equals icebergs melting. And somehow we thought that it's going to affect the future generation. Even we felt that it's going to affect the future quote-unquote generation. But it came to our attention around year 2019 that it's not only going to affect the future generation, but also the present generation, you and I. It's going to affect our summers, our springs, our winters, and not just the polar bears. So that's where we really decided, we had to take action. But even before the only means of tools that we had was to, stage one-person strikes, standing in front of the National Assembly, which seemed too pessimistic. And we wanted to secure something more concrete through legal measures. And the initial response that we got was that it's not going to happen. It won't stand being a legal litigation case. There is no preceding case that you can reference. So many lawyers also tried to dissuade us from going ahead with the litigation.
부분이 있었던 것 같습니다.
But we somehow managed to, go over all those obstacles and kicked it off. So it was really a fight of David and Goliath from the beginning. And to see the results, have the Constitutional Court, give you that ruling in 4 years' time must have been quite thrilling. So what did it feel like when the final ruling was given? Well, at the site, I cried so much when the final ruling was, the sentence was given. So I cried so much, and the court police actually tried to guide me out because I was crying so much. But the fact that we won was really, really encouraging and happy. So the initial ruling was that the litigation was a win, but there were also some subsequent areas where we did not win. So my tears kind of quickly dried. But still, on the first day, when we got the winning rule, it was great to hear the subsequent no wins. It was a bit disappointing, but and I heard her crying so hard sitting right next to me, so I tried to keep my cry to a minimum. So it's already been like 5 years at that point, and I learned that the state system did not really allow for individual citizens like myself to have a saying in the state affairs. But the final ruling gave us some hope that, there are things that we can do as a team, as a group. So while there were some areas of disappointment, I think we did make some progress.
긴장되기도 했지만
At that time, I was very nervous. So I thought about the two scenarios. When we win, when you lose, I prepared a press conference for both cases. And depending on the ruling, I had to meet with the press to have a conference. So I was very nervous and busy-minded at that time. But through this litigation, the message I want to deliver is that non-action against climate change is unconstitutional. So when I heard the sentence, I thought that that's it. The court ruling is not ultimate decision. The ultimate answer could be found through the democratic process. So sitting idle, or we can force the others to take actions. Right? So now that's with what we did through the Constitutional Court. So now we are in the beginning start line. So that is the real beginning for our action down the road. When the litigation was opened, Chairperson, you read that from the newspaper. When the ruling was delivered, you would have some emotions, some your own ideas. So climate crisis is already upon us. What do you think about that? Is that really meaningful, or is the ruling too early for the Korean society? How do you interpret the decision?
저는 10대도 20대도 아닙니다.
I'm not in my teens or 20s.
세상이 또 정부가 어떤 계획을 세웠다고 그게 어떤 결과로 그 목표에 도달을 하는지 이런 것.
So when government set a plan, and then the plan could be implemented to produce some outcome, right? That's my experience. And now the country, the government set the goal for the climate change by 2050. That is the principle.
그래서 당연하게
So of course, I think that the Constitutional Court ruling is very valid and reasonable.
하는 것도 중요하지만
Goal setting is important itself. However, how to get the goal is more important than the goal setting.
지금 국가 그 감축 목표 제시한 것 가지고도 우리
Now, the reduction target is an issue of
건 아니죠.
active discussion, and our
국내 현실적 여건이
We have not decided on that, and there are the parameters, internal parameters and external parameters to interaction of those realizing the goal. So how to reach the goal?
혼자서 할 수 있는 게 아닙니다.
In order to reach the goal, the concerted effort is needed involving the government and the businesses.
다 같이
All together, the collected wisdom is needed. Just a single entity's effort is not enough to reach the goal. The conundrum and the climate crisis is not the issue is not confined to one sector. All beings on the planet is affected by the climate crisis, and the roles and responsibilities of those individuals are different. However, the key is government intervention to guarantee the success. So consensus building is important, as well as
모아서 나가느냐.
the wisdom collection and the power gathering is as important.
싶습니다. 우리가 해야 한다. 그렇다고 꼭
If we say that if we must do it, do you say that it was really implemented? We can do it. Should we do it?
그 사안에 따라서 상당히
Depending on the issues on your hand, the outcomes could be different.
이라는 것은 그 중에도 가장
Climate crisis is the most tricky work.
하나 없고 인간
So all sectors, all human behaviors are affected by the climate crisis. That's why this issue is very difficult.
정부가
And I understand the government position is also very difficult. Currently, a lot of voices are coming out from the society toward the government. So government initiative is really hard to set.
커뮤니케이션은
Nevertheless,
풀어가는 데 있어서
communication will be the key to approach this kind of issue.
또 인정할 수 있고
Communication is the way to admitting the other parties or to build a consensus that we have to work together. And also, your role and my roles could be defined, could be through the communication.
헤어지면서 같이
So when those things are defined, then we can work together toward the role. We cannot leave the work to the businesses only. Businesses are emitters who are using the products
그러니까 우리 공
after the businesses emitting the carbon dioxide, the consumers. So this we have to grow aware that all these issues affect our life.
이슈에서 가장 중요한 것은 이해와 공감이
I think in order to resolve the global issues, we need cooperation and cooperation and communication. However, it is easy. It is not easy to do the collaboration and communication. Otherwise, we cannot achieve sustainable development or guarantee the sustained survival of humanity.
나오고 있기 때문에
So the crisis is threatening our existence. So the sense of cooperation, sense of collaboration is a must for us to have.
말씀이 잘 되는지 모르겠어요.
I'm not so sure whether my message get across to you. That's very important.
실천과 그걸 위해서는 이제 소통이 중요하다.
Yes, you touched upon a very important point that really it's the action that is going to speak the loudest.
그게 화면에
I think we have some photos that we could share with the audience today, showing how the activists really
아까
put in a lot of work.
했었나요? 제가 진행하면서 제대로 못 봤을 수도 있을 것 같은데 조금 약간 준비된 사진 한번 말씀을 해주시면.
So just to go over some of the key moments.
했다는데 그게 잘 상상이 안 되실 것 같아서.
Yes, this is how we demonstrated how we try to raise public awareness. So in 2019, climate change was not
그래서
really
자신의 개인적 실천을 하기
a task that was prevalent among the society, but there were already some young students who were taking on the issue of climate change as something that they really needed to focus on. So we wanted to bring this issue to the attention of the policymakers and the media. So we connected via online, and step by step, we were really in our teens. So there were just only certain things that we could do as a teenager. So that's why we did these picket strikes, showing, trying to show or voice our concerns. And then we gathered more force and we sent in letters and through the form of letters with the message in our own voices. So what we think of the climate change issues and how we think it should be resolved. So this is in 2020 when we first brought the case to the Constitutional Court.
아까 말씀 중에 이게 아시아에서 이런 성격의 첫 소송이라고 했는데
You mentioned that this is the first of its kind in Asia and in the Netherlands. It's the world's first case. So how would you, evaluate this action in Korea in terms of the global community?
사실 국가의 기후 대응이 엄청 진전이 있을 거라고 기대를 처음엔 되게
We naively thought that the government's policy or response to climate change is going to dramatically change once we get the ruling of the Constitutional Court. We later learned that that is not the case, that the Constitutional Court's ruling is like the very baseline. And then we learned that social change or actual change needs to follow, just like the chairperson mentioned. So the final ruling, the sentencing of the Constitutional Courts is the starting point, it's the baseline. And we need to really put that into action. In countries like Japan and Taiwan, they are also proceeding with similar litigations, and I think our win can really help them out, taking that one step forward. So as Chairperson mentioned, really, it's something that we really need to work together through joint forces.
기후뿐만 아니라 전체 환경 운동에 대해서도 이야기를 조금 나눠보면
So I would like to invite the panel to
앞서 있었던 그동안에 쭉 여러 가지
share their thoughts about not just the climate change issues, but the overall environmental movement. So any observations or opinions.
어떻게 보시는지
So how do you see the overall environmental movement / climate change movement?
시민사회에서도 기후 변화가 첫 번째 제일 중요한
The climate agenda has not long been on our agenda in a civil movement.
근데 그런 과정에서도 우리가 진짜
In our activities, we thought that the focus should be the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas and climate crisis. So from 2019, the climate change has been our focal point, our movement. So the use for climate action as a group contributed a lot to our paradigm shift. Civil society activities would be viable when if there is a participation from the citizens. So now I think that the climate change is not high on the overall agenda. The urgency is not well understood across the society. But however, if the oil price goes up or if a single-use product should be regulated, or if the issues that would affect daily life would be prioritized over other more important agenda. So that's why we have to work harder and push harder.
저희는 2018년에 그런 모임을 만들고
It was 2018 that we put together our organization and these days the campaigns. In 2018 and 2019, climate change was the buzzword. However, climate crisis was new to us.
찾을 순 없을까?
So we tried to find more of the plaintiff in this litigation, but we were rejected so much. However, climate crisis was not high on the agenda. However, after the 2020, the climate crisis became the source of a lot of social movement and campaign.
해보지 않았던 그런
And for those who have not engaged in the social movement,
자리에서
stood up to deal with the climate crisis, and they even went out for the specific actions.
정부에서도 기후위기에 대한 어떤
At the government level, increases on the climate crisis has been increased. However,
또 개인의 영역 그리고
when climate crisis were upon at the individual level, the issue was regarded as an individual response.
되게 큰 논의를 하고 있고
Actually, the government was engaged in the policy level. When, like this summer, the temperature was so hot and sizzling, all the responsibilities and the responses were passed down at the individual level.
계속 발제 들으면서 기후위기라는 단어가 너무 많이 나와서
And the climate crisis was the frequent words in today's event. So previously, I thought that climate crisis was very new to other people. People just say, "Are you talking about global warming?" But today, I heard a lot about climate crisis. I'm very surprised.
약간 문제라고 생각했던 지점들 중에 하나가
And
기후위기가
from that,
다가오는
actually, climate crisis is coming to us. However, on the political circle in other front, the responses to the climate crisis is outdated or it's not urgent. The politicians always make a promise that they want to reduce the greenhouse gas and how to shift the industrial activities. Of course, that could be the response to the climate crisis. However, climate crisis is a crisis because it threatens our daily life.
기후위기를 어떻게 적응해 나갈까?
So how to assimilate or how to adapt the climate crisis, how to keep our life alive is not well discussed. And so as a result, the policy responses to the climate crisis are lacking. That's why the ordinary citizens does not really realize the severity of the climate crisis. People are talking about the climate crisis, however, they are rare to talk about the crisis, the responses to the climate crisis. So now I think it is time to discuss how to adapt, how to accommodate the climate crisis in our life. And you pointed out the roles of the government and state.
를 오래 역임하셨던 이사님 보시기에
Yes. As the former minister, what kind of comments could you make in relation to the environmental policies of the Korean government? Well, I was a policy maker, and I might not be the right person to evaluate the process, but
환경이었죠. 생태 용량 열악한 가운데 세계 최고속의 산업화 도시가
Korea has a very unique situation. We have very little resources. We've had the fastest growing economy. Everything was export driven. So we were very heavily, had the highest level of environmental stress. And in the 2000s, we proceeded with some very aggressive policies. And I believe that has made some progress. But I'd like to once again emphasize that the perspective of the government cannot be the same as the NGOs or the activists. There are different perspectives and different roles that each side has to take on. Now, I recall that around the year 2000, the NGOs back then, environmental NGOs, had one of the strongest voices.
경제가 어려워지면 기업이 침체해서 생존이 문제가
But at the
되는데
time, we had some economic
때려가지고
difficulties,
거기에 투자해야 되고
and it was very difficult for the government to strike a balance between economic development and environmental protection. So you can't really sacrifice one for the sake of the other. There really has to be a harmony. There really has to be a win-win. And this was the basic policy line of the people's government back in the 2000s. And this win-win kind of approach, saying that, we have to pursue economic development and economic environmental protection at the same time, was really well received by both the environmental NGOs and the civil society and the businesses alike. So this is not something that is just too idealistic. We have success cases in other countries as well. So it's not necessarily one over the other. And in fact, that is going to be less effective than when we pursue two rabbits at the same time. Now, climate change is going to exacerbate. We all know that. And even today, I don't think the focus should be, okay, let's all go for renewable energy. Let's all go for less use of plastic alone. Less use of fossil fuel is not going to miraculously create a clean future, because if we use less fossil fuel, then it's going to impact the economy in myriads of ways. That is going to have ripple effects, and it's not necessarily going to be all good for the environment. Renewable energy is the same. The conditions of how renewable energy can be introduced to an economy differs ever so greatly in all the different countries. The current or the most recent discussion about responding to climate change or environmental crisis was that if we stop using fossil fuel and if we shift to renewable energy, then voila, we're going to have a solution. But I emphasize that that is not how the society works. That's not how the economy works. Resources go through a process which is far more complicated than just the issue of is it fossil fuel or is it renewable energy. All manufacturing activities, be it through fossil fuel, be it through renewable, uses up resources. It will inevitably create waste, and waste has to be treated, whether it's created through using fossil fuel or whether it's used from renewable energy. So the key issue here, I think, to improve the overall efficiency of the way we use resources. Now, in our parents' generation, the key word was save. Save electricity, save water, save paper, and so forth. The same rhetoric might not work with the current generation because everything is so abundant. Yet, we need to emphasize the increasing the resource efficiency if we are to make progress. So I mentioned that the different religions, different philosophies have a common theme, and this is what I'm talking about. We need to bring all the different ideas together and think of it in a holistic view and really talk about how we're going to make things more effective. Korea has always been a leader in terms of giving good performance. Now we need to add that or top that off with better efficiency. So in all of the governments, we've had good performance. Now we need to add the good efficiency to that as well. Thank you very much. I think we have about 5 minutes to go. And I'd like to spend the last minutes asking our panels to share their thoughts about their views on peace and life.
기후 변화가 미치는 영향 또는 기후 변화
You
해결하기
can of course
위해서는
link that to
뭐 여러 가지
the
것들이
climate
있을 수
change
있을 것
issues as
같은데,
well. We're going to
끝에서부터
start off
어떻게
with
생각하시는지
Hyun-jung and share your thoughts about that.
사실 전쟁이 없다고 해서 평화인 건 아닌 것 같다는
I
생각을
think
되게 많이 하고
Peace
있는 것
is not
왜냐하면
exactly
사실
opposite
전쟁이라는 게 왜
to
위험하냐라고 했을 때
war.
우리의
So
일상을
unless
멈추고
there's
그 모든
war,
것들을 파괴하기
its
때문에
peace
전쟁이라고
is
부르는
no longer
것이고,
the
그럼
case.
그 반대로 불리는 평화라고 하는 것들은 우리의 일상이나 삶이 정상적으로 지속되기
I
때문에
think
지향해야
peace
한다고 말을 하잖아요. 근데 그런 관점에서 보면 기후위기도 마찬가지인
needs
것
to
같아요.
be a state
기후위기는 우리
of
삶과 일상을 위협하기 때문에 위기라고 불리는
less
것이고
threat.
사실
So climate change
지금의 일상을
threatens
지속하지 못하게
our
하기
everyday
때문에
lives. So
전쟁을
climate
닮아
change
있다는
may
생각을
not be
많이 하는 것
a
같습니다.
war as we
그렇기
know
때문에
it,
그 위기가
but
우리
it
사회에
has the
미치는
same
영향,
effect
그리고
of a
사람들에게 미치는
war
영향을
on our
보면은
daily lives.
전쟁과 되게 다를 바가 없다.
So I
이게
would
사실
say
이
climate change
위기가
is
평화를 되게
almost
위협한 존재라는
equal
것들을 되게
to
많이
war
느끼게 되는
in
것
terms
같아요.
of threatening the daily peace. So I think that's how I would look at climate change
질문은 현정님과 비슷해서
in relation to
이런
peace.
복합 위기 시대에 그러면 어떤 마음가짐이 필요할지
Yes, we talked about the poly crisis that we're faced with, and I wanted to say a few words about that.
문제를 다루다
The
보면
climate change
항상
always
전환을 해야 된다.
seems to be
전환을
a difficult
만들어야
question, and we always
이게
talk about
너무
having to
어려운 것
transform
같아요.
our thoughts, transform the way we live,
막막함이
transform the
계속
way we
먼저 찾아올
manufacture.
정도로. 왜냐하면
That's
기후위기는 우리
quite
사회가
overwhelming,
작동해왔던 방식을 모두 바꿔야
because
한다고
climate
하는데
change is
그게
basically
쉽지는
saying
않잖아요.
we need to, climate crisis is saying
위기
that we need to,
시대에서는 그래도 변화가
topple
가능하다라는
everything
마음이 굉장히
we
중요할
know
수밖에 없지 않을까? 이런 생각을
of
되게 많이
how we
하는 것
lived,
같습니다.
how we worked, and so
온실가스를
forth.
배출하고 계속 성장을 해온 게제 세대에선 특히나
Greenhouse gas
익숙하거든요.
emission has
근데
been
그걸 모두
a
바꾸라는
given
게
in
되게
order to
어렵고
make
그래서
economic
어떤
progress.
정책 의사결정자에게
And
이런 걸
this
전달하면
climate crisis
저는
is
중요한 걸
asking us
알지만
to
어렵다.
stop that.
현실적으로
So
무리라는
that's why
이야기가
it's
항상 들어왔었던 것 같아요.
difficult,
근데
and the society as a
결국에는
whole
그럼에도
has
변화해야
been,
되고 전환을
kind of
거대한
resisting
전환을 해야
that
한다면
change because it was deemed as so
어려움의
difficult.
시선보다는
But I
지금
think
사회가
we need
극단적으로
to really
양극화돼가고
see this from a different
개개인의
perspective.
삶도
So
점점
instead of saying, oh, that's a
불안정해지는
difficult,
상황에서
it's an
기후위기가
overwhelming,
단지
daunting
환경 문제 중에
task,
하나가 아니라
we really need to
우리
see it
삶과
from
우리가
the
살아가는
perspective
사회가
of
치명적이고
our
복합적인 위험을
lives.
겪게 되는
So
문제인
it's not
만큼
just about saving the environment, it's
앞으로
not just
변화가
about
가능하고 우리의
doing
행동이 더
business
나은 변화를
differently.
만들 수
It's
있다라는
really about
그런 가능성,
how
그런
we
믿음이
decide
지금 무엇보다
to
더 필요한
live
시기인 것 같습니다.
with the future generations. So that's, I think, the kind of approach that I would like to propose.
사실 전통적인
As I listened to the previous presentation, I thought about the the conventional concept of the climate change and the crisis. European politics have been changed. The key to the change is the refugees. Due to the weather changes in the Middle East, the agriculture failed, the farmers become poor, and they escape the country. And they want to walk out of the conflict. So the stability was shattered, and the abundance was reduced to the rarity. So the the world has become unpleasant. That's why a lot of refugees were pouring out of the region. Water resources and the food will be another source of conflict, and it is hard to control with the human activities. So not only the abnormal weathers, but also the democracy, peace, or the framework could be shattered by the climate crisis. We have to be aware of the risks. Yes, I agree. As time's up, right?
시간이 굉장히 그래도 이사장님 혹시 말씀 있으시면 한 1분 정도 괜찮지 않을까요?
So I would like to give you 1 minute, Chairperson Kim. The climate crisis is included in the poly crisis, complex crisis. And also we have been using the expression multiple crisis in relation to climate. Climate crisis is an omnipotent crisis across all sectors. If you look at the historical cases, when crisis hits, the society is dismantled and everything is broken from upside down.
이제 우리가 다 같이 아는 게 중요한데요.
knowledge, knowing is important. We have to know the root cause and also we have to navigate through the difficulties and problems. And so like today's gathering, we need to share our ideas and opinions. We have to think about the root causes of the problem.
뭐 그런 말도 있죠. Leadership is conversation.
Leadership, there is a saying that leadership is conversation. So conversation would be the key to find way out of those multiple crises, and we need to be companion for each other.
네 분께 큰 박수
Thank you.
부탁드립니다.
Big round of applause again to the panelists and
네,
the
고맙습니다.
chairperson.
다시 한번
Thank you.
강연과 토론으로 의미 있는 시간을 꾸며주신 5분께 큰 박수
Another big round of
보내주시면
applause for
감사하겠습니다.
these 5 important figures.
네, 두 번째 세션이 진행되는 동안 많은 분들께서 고개를 끄덕끄덕 하시면서
I saw a lot of
것
people were
같았습니다.
nodding
당장
in
올
the
겨울도
second
한파가
special
오고 있는데요.
lecture. And this
이제는
winter
정말 이야기할
will be
때인
very
것
cold
같습니다.
again. Now it
이번
is really high time to
기자회견에서
let this out.
끝이
And
아닌
the
이후는 시작이다라는
constitutional
말을
constitutional
그만큼
ruling
의미 있는
people
시작을
say that
하는
the decision
시간이었다는
is not the
생각이
end
들었습니다.
but the beginning
자,
of
그럼
new road.
이것으로 김대중 100년 평화페스티벌 1일차
Now this
학술 행사를
concludes the
모두
first day
마치도록
of
하겠습니다. 그리고
the
내일
Centennial of
2일차는
Kim-dae-jung's birth and peace festival.
진행이
Tomorrow we will begin our program
특별
from
강연과
10:30
프로그램들
and special
끝까지
lectures and the awarding
진심으로
ceremony were
감사하겠습니다.
prepared. I hope
오늘
you
긴
can
시간
join
함께
again
자리해주신
for tomorrow as well.
청취자분들,
Thank
여러분께
you.
감사의
Thank you all
인사드리면서
for
저는
keeping
이만
your
물러가도록 하겠습니다.
seats
함께해 주신
until the very
여러분,
end.
고맙습니다.
Thank you.